underrated strategies out there. Everybody knows what an independent read, everybody knows what a whole class read is, but if they were done correctly, we would see a whole lot more leveraging in students' literacy skills. So we're going to talk about that today. Okay, so we have an objective. Participants will be able to implement the independent reading and the whole class read aloud supports with students while using your high quality instructional materials. So here's our agenda. We're going to review briefly the content literacy series. We're going to talk about the purpose of an independent reading and look at it in action, and then the purpose of a whole class read aloud and that in action. Then we'll talk about some next steps and a closure. Okay, so last week, we talked briefly about Scarborough's reading rope, and I told you that this upper strand and this lower strand kind of weave together to create a skilled reader. And in secondary, especially in grades 6 through 12, this is so important to understand because a lot of times we have students in our room who we know are not proficient readers, but we have no idea how to fix that or what to do about that. So it can become very confusing. The good news about this is it gives us a visual, and it says that if we work on these things, we can help them to become a skilled reader if they're not. Okay. And so the content literacy series really focuses on this upper strand, this language comprehension strand. Okay. Improving background knowledge to help create skilled readers, vocabulary knowledge, language structure knowledge, so syntax and semantics, verbal reasoning, which is inferences and metaphors, and just general literacy knowledge. Do they understand how the text structure contributes to the meaning of that text? Okay. And if you need help on word recognition, go back to sessions 1 through 4 of this series, which are posted in the literacy library. I'll put the link there in the chat before I hop off. But sessions 1 through 4 really focused on how to do interventions around that bottom strand. So phonological awareness, the student's ability to decode, and helping them to create that sight recognition with words. Okay. So the content literacy series builds proficiency within the 4 areas of literacy, which are reading, writing, speaking, and listening, using high quality instructional materials in a whole class setting. So these are just teacher moves that you can use while you're already teaching your curriculum, whatever it is, curriculum that you're using in whatever content area that you're teaching. And so they're broken up by those different categories. Today, we're really focusing on that reading area. We're going to focus specifically, like I said, on the whole class and the independent, but they also have partner reading is available, annotating text, direct and explicit vocabulary instruction, and reading and writing for a purpose. The writing supports that are available in Live Now are creating a claim, reading and writing for a purpose, summary writing to develop comprehension, using rubrics, using student exemplars, writing frames. And then coming soon, you will have a discussion tracker, a Socratic seminar, and a fishbowl discussion. And it's just so exciting. Sarah, thanks for posting the literacy library link. So all these supports, you'll be able to click on that link and see them there. And I'll show you how to access the pre-recorded ones as well if you missed sessions 1 through 4. Okay, so the purpose of independent reading. A lot of times we'll assign reading for students to do independently, and they may or may not do it. We might get frustrated because they didn't do it. They didn't get what they needed to get out of it. So let's talk about what the intended purpose of an independent read is. The purpose is to build students' fluency by independently decoding words and determining meaning, as well as building knowledge around a content-specific idea or topic. Okay, so in session 2 of this series, I talked about the importance of fluency and how we have to assign reading independently that's on students' independent level. And so we'll talk about how do we leverage that and what do we do when students are not there? How do we still use the curriculum and still do independent reading when students are not at the correct reading level? Independent reading is an essential skill in literacy because students need practice in reading to become more proficient. You know, something that's very common is assigning math homework. You got to practice your math problems to become more proficient with that skill. Reading is the exact same way. If we want students to get better at reading, they have to practice that reading, even if it means it has to be on their level. So independent reading in action, what does it look like if we're doing it as intended to get these purposes out of it? The first thing that we have to do as a teacher is we have to pre-read the text for that day's lesson. We have to determine what parts can be assigned independently, and we have to anticipate any struggles students may have with vocabulary, syntax, background knowledge, or literacy knowledge, and all those upper parts of the rope. So if you decide that, okay, the curriculum says to independently read 2 chapters, but I know realistically, I really can get my students, or this student in particular, to maybe independently read these 2 pages, because they're the most important to understanding the idea for tomorrow's lesson, whatever the case is, but just being very intentional about the load that you're asking students to have and helping to create structures when they're not capable of doing that. So if you know the vocabulary is going to be a struggle inside of those 2 pages, providing them some practice with the direct and explicit instruction beforehand so they can access it independently. It's so important to communicate the purpose of independent reading with students. Students need to understand why they're reading independently. And there's 2 purposes. There's the purpose of independent reading, and then there's the purpose of what they should extract from the reading. So it's equally as important to communicate both of those purposes. So the first purpose you need to communicate with them is this slide. You need to tell them, guys, I'm assigning this independent reading, and the purpose is this. It's going to build your fluency. By practicing, you're going to become more proficient with reading, okay? And then you want to establish a purpose for reading that particular day. And so reading and writing for a purpose is another content literacy support, and it has a lot more information on this step. And we'll get to this support in a session a few from now. The purpose could be locating the main idea. It could be finding information to support a claim. It could be making an alternate claim. There's different purposes for reading inside of each of the different content areas on each of the different days of the week that you're teaching those different lessons. So pre-reading it, determining what struggles may happen, being very intentional about how much and what you assign independently, communicating the purpose of independent reading, and communicating the purpose of what they should take out of it. Determine how you will hold students accountable for the assigned reading. So maybe it's that you have a discussion question that they're going to, think, pair, share, or share out loud. Maybe they're answering a question in writing, but just think about how you want to hold them accountable and make it very purposeful. If you're assigning something for independent reading, there should be a really big purpose in doing that, and something very important that you need for them to extract to understand the content. So in action. So if I was teaching a class and we're doing independent reading today, this is what I might say. Good morning, class. Now you will independently read paragraphs 4 and 5 of Tough Issues to determine what was a major challenge of the Constitutional Convention. Remember, independent reading helps us practice reading to build skills in vocabulary, grammar, and helps us build our sight vocabulary. Practicing reading helps you become a better reader, not just in this class, but in life. And also, as you're reading, guys, just remember your annotation procedure as you read. Be sure to select the evidence required to answer that question, okay? So, you might already go ahead, like I said, and assign independent reading, but as a teacher, I pre-planned intentionally. I know that this is maybe a tougher text inside of my social studies class. They're not going to have the stamina maybe to read the whole thing. And it might not just be the class that you're anticipating. It might be, like I said, the class can do it. They should be pushed to do it, but you have 4 or 5 students who you know are going to struggle, and you really just want them to get what they can out of paragraphs 4 and 5, taking off some of the load of how much they have to process so they can think deeply about paragraphs 4 and 5. Communicating that purpose to them of both the strategy and why they're reading and how you're going to hold them accountable. Okay, super simple, but so underrated. It really is. Okay, so let's switch gears. We talked about independent reading. Let's talk about whole class read alouds. So the purpose of the whole class read alouds is very similar, but it's to build students' fluency by hearing the words and seeing the letter word correspondence so that they will recognize the words again. Both as a teacher of middle school students and as a coach of teachers teaching anything from K to 9, a lot of times teachers think that when we do a read aloud, we really just want them to extract the content. Are they getting the big ideas? That's not the only purpose behind a whole class read aloud. We want them to understand what they're hearing and reading, but equally as important, we want them tracking this information so that they can start adding and building to their sight vocabulary, okay? Whole class read alouds also help to build content knowledge. So there is that secondary purpose. Whole class read aloud in action. Okay, so just like we had to pre-read, we have to pre-read the text for that day's lesson. Once again, we have to determine what parts should be read whole class and anticipate any struggles students may have with vocabulary, syntax, background knowledge, literacy knowledge, etc. And again, I tag that direct and explicit vocabulary instruction. Students are going to have a lot of struggles sometimes, guys, and we can't hit all of those things in one day. So we really want to think about what is really inhibiting them today from reading this and extracting information. What's one thing we can maximize in this lesson today to help them understand, read, and comprehend this whole class read aloud? So they might have a couple of these different struggles, but we might say, oh my goodness, there's 2 vocabulary terms today that are just essential to them understanding the material, and I need some direct and explicit vocabulary instruction. Or maybe it is a crazy hard piece of poetry, and syntax is really going to be a struggle today. So really need to understand that when they have this, this is a pause and this is why. Okay. So leveraging and thinking intentionally about the different components of this and what might need to be preloaded for them to understand the whole class read aloud. Communicate the purpose of the read aloud with the students. So once again, the purpose is to build fluency and build content knowledge, and tell them explicitly. I would tell them it's a 7th grade classroom. Guys, as I'm reading, I should see you tracking with your eyes or even tracking with your fingers. If I had a student in 7th grade who was on a 1st grade reading level, which happened, I wanted to see their finger tracking because I want to make sure that they're really tracking and hearing and seeing those words, what they look like as we go. And then you want to establish a purpose for reading that day, just like we talked about with the independent. Determine how you will hold them accountable for the assigned reading. Circulate the room to ensure students are tracking the words read with either, like I said, their finger or their eye, so that you can ensure students are making that sound letter correspondence. Okay. They know that reconstruction looks like reconstruction, REC. We want to hear it and see it, because even if students, say the majority of your class is on a 5th grade reading level, it's a 7th grade class. If they see reconstruction several times throughout that passage, that's going to help contribute that, unless there's a major learning disability within their sight recognition. Okay. And then pause intermittently to check for understanding and discuss key ideas. So if you have a whole class read aloud and it's asking you to read 3 pages, don't just do a whole 3-page read. Pause in between to ensure that they're understanding A, what they read, and B, the purpose for reading that day. So these are just different varieties of reading for a whole class. Sometimes the teacher themselves could read aloud. Sometimes, and I saw this was very popular, an audio recording is playing from YouTube or something like that. I encourage you, if you do that, just to switch it up and don't do that all the time. In Louisiana, we have rich, beautiful dialects, and sometimes something as easy as that, students don't identify with a different dialect spoken in another place. So also we have echo reading. This is not something usually that secondary teachers are familiar with, but echo reading is when I read a line or a sentence and then the students read it back to me. Okay. And then you have core reading. You all read together at one time. Okay. It's important to note, though, that whatever version of the read aloud is chosen, the correct rate and expression are modeled when reading. Okay. So that's another thing we want them to take away from a whole class read aloud. If you have some students in that class and they don't pause for punctuation as they're reading, and you're modeling that, chances are if they hear good reading frequently enough, they're going to start adopting that and start doing that themselves. We also want to hear the correct expression. If we're reading a novel, or if we have a narrative that we're reading, we want to have expression in there so they can understand how to interpret that and copy that on their own when they're going to read independently themselves. All right, so some next steps, and then I'm going to kind of walk you through what the different supports look like. So I want you to look at some upcoming lessons to decide where the load should be and whether students should independently read the selection or teachers should read the selection out loud. Partner reading is another option. It can be considered when considering the lift. You can think about that as well. It's those 3 different levels: whole class, partner, independent. I think it's really important that always, no matter what class you have, even if it's an inclusion class, even if it's an EL class, that at some point students are given the opportunity to at least read something independently. And we don't want to create frustration. We definitely don't want to give them, like I said, 2 and 3 pages of something, but maybe, it's a newcomer and, you have something scaffolded for them to read a sentence. Maybe it's an inclusion student and they're on a 5th grade level instead of a 7th grade. So you're asking them to read a couple of paragraphs. Maybe it's an advanced student and the rest of the class is reading the page, and you have pulled something extra for them or tell them to research and read something extra. But you really have to consider the students' needs and what the load should be when doing the reading. Print or bookmark the support so that you can refer back to the explicit directions. These are moves that are probably in your curriculum. But like I said, when we understand the intentionality, when we understand the purpose of really what should be happening inside of an independent and whole class reading or a partner reading, you're going to get much more out of it. The students are going to get much more out of it. Okay. Ask yourself after the lesson if you highlighted the intentionality required from that support. So ask yourself this question. Are you noticing a difference as a result of the implementation? If you're not noticing a difference with what students are saying or doing or habits or practices, then go back and look at the support and see if maybe there's a part of the support you can be more intentional with. So this is what the two look like. Okay, here's independent reading. And Sarah has copied and pasted the link to access these. And as always, the slide deck will be available for you as well. All of the supports start out with where these are applicable within the different content areas. I think it's really important to note here too, that every department, every content area at the department read these, gave feedback on these, vetted these. So ELA, math, science, social studies, and diverse learners all gave feedback on all of these different supports. Each one shows you who could this support, the purpose of the support, and I told you why it's so important to communicate the purpose of it. A very explicit process, very step-by-step on what to do, what to say. I know I'm successful when. So you know you're successful when students are able to fill out the graphic organizer successfully, or students will start to recognize some of the words read and begin reading your content area text with the appropriate fluency and develop comprehension of main ideas. Okay. Additional considerations is always how it ends. These are different things you could just use for any class, but they're always definitely written with diverse learners in mind. So if you have different needs in your classroom, you could set a purpose for just that one reading. You could set an amount of time. You could have students discuss what they read with a partner. You could hold conferences with individual students to monitor fluency, accuracy, or comprehension. That last bullet is really probably more for our ELA teachers. But this is a great thing to do in secondary. It doesn't have to be long. It can be a paragraph, but it really gives you an idea of what they look and sound like as they're reading your content material. And are they extracting what they need to extract out of it? Hearing them read it, you'll understand and you'll know. All right, so here's the whole class read aloud. Again, where it would apply in the different content areas, who it could support, purpose, and communicating that very explicit process. I know I'm successful when, and just additional considerations once again. So that's what the supports look like. Okay, Sarah posted that, and she also posted where you can find the previous recordings. So if you click on that link and you scroll all the way to the bottom right, you will see, and they should be this week uploading sessions 4 and 5, but these are the previous recordings if you missed any of them, and the slide decks that go with it. So this recording and slide deck will be posted here as well, either late this week or early next week. Let's jump back into our presentation. All right, so in closure, being intentional with our reading supports inside the curriculum will allow us to build literacy skills for students inside our content areas. Strategies as simple as independent reading and whole class read alouds can have a significant impact on student outcomes, both inside the curriculum and inside other content areas. Improving skills within content literacy will improve proficiency within everyday literacy skills so that students will become more proficient at reading and writing. And just as always, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear from you at louisianaliteracy@la.gov. We have quite a few more weeks left of the second part of our double feature where we're going to continue to dive into our different content literacy supports.